But it's getting harder and harder to find Roman Catholics who want to come and debate. So I welcome any of the ones that do, and you're welcome to make as many arguments as you want. You just request to speak, and then I'll give you the microphone. You can say whatever you want for as long as you want. You just have to make arguments. So we're not here to debate me, my personality. None of that stuff is relevant to the topic at hand. So keep it to the issues, stick to the issues. And you can freely speak. We can keep it civil. Converse, what's up, man?
Hey, what's up?
What's on your mind?
Hey, so I just want to discuss that article you posted about Catholics leaving the Baltimore churches.
Okay.
And the cause of it.
Okay, and you don't think the cause has to do with the rampant sexual abuse and the 150 or so priests that abused 600 people over the last several decades?
I think that's a factor and maybe a symptom of the greater underlying problem, which is going to be something more like these lukewarm, cultural, liberal Christians. And, they basically don't adhere fully to the Catholic faith. And what they're doing is when any cultural issue comes up that gives them an excuse to not go to church, they're going to be leaving, and they're going to go to these more traditional churches.
So you don't see the problem in the Vatican itself at all? It's all just the libs and the liberal Catholics?
I'd say it's a factor. Scandal and the general disposition of the clergy does play a factor.
Well, you said the clergy. What about the Vatican?
I think there could be more clarity and conviction on on just having all the Catholics believe in what we profess every week in the creed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about the teachings of the Vatican? Do you think the Vatican has maintained the faith of the first 1,000 years of Christianity?
Well, I'll say with the specifics in Baltimore, honestly, I think nowadays, if you're Catholic, you don't necessarily have to get into every detail or get into an argument. I think, honestly, we just need to ask people, do you believe in the dogma of the Catholic Church? And what I mean by that is that in the article you posted,
mm-hmm.
you had people leaving these Baltimore churches. People got interviewed in these Baltimore churches that are closing down. And they're leaving because Catholics were a major factor in the overturning of Roe v. Wade.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't see that as, those people obviously, they put other things above their faith. I think that's the main.
That is the big part of it. I agree with that. And you have the same patterns in a lot of liberal Greek Orthodox parishes, for example. But I'm more concerned with the theological mistakes that the Vatican has promoted for so many years. For example, I'm looking at Lumen Gentium 16, and it says that Muslims and Christians share the faith of Abraham. My point is that the liberal ethics is downstream from the theological errors. You wouldn't be making these theological errors unless you had a defective faith. Why would you think, as the Vatican has taught for 70 plus years, around 70 years, I should say, why would you think that Muslims and Christians believe and worship the same God?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I know there's a whole debate on what sense are they meaning when they say one God, but I don't think that's the main issue. Recently we had, some new document come out, a letter from the Vatican. And, me and some of my friends, we read it and we were wanting to talk to our Catholics about it. We couldn't find a single other Catholic that's reading a letter that came out. You talk about Vatican II. I'm reading with my friends these encyclicals throughout church history, and most people haven't even read a single encyclical. There's a lot of
Okay.
Catholics. Oh yeah, sorry.
Well, I've read a lot of them, so I used to be a trad cat. I know all the typical, standard, traditional Roman Catholic encyclicals from the Clement to Leo the 13th to Pius X. I'm familiar with all those. My point is that the spiritual rot in the parishes is a result of the rot from the top down for a long time. So it's not just a matter of again, libs and the libs here and there. Why would there be such a massive failure amongst the population if it wasn't located in the theological deviations? So, for example, if the Vatican is teaching and has taught for about 70 years that Muslims and Christians worship the same God, that's a sign that the Vatican teaches defective theology, that it doesn't teach the Trinity. No person who believes in the Trinity and the deity of Christ could ever think that a Muslim worships the same God as a Trinitarian Christian. It's ludicrous. So you have it backwards. The theological errors is what has led to all of the quote lib stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there is a conversation that should be going on. I know you have it with many Catholics, and there's a lot of conversation between two, a Catholic who knows this stuff and an Orthodox who knows this stuff. But specifically for why people are leaving the churches, in the Catholic world, there's you can discuss all day about which mass is more reverent, right?
Okay, but don't you
And
think most of
yeah,
the libs believe in indifferentism?
yeah, I do.
Oh, okay. And what is indifferentism but this very point that I'm making that's been condemned before Vatican II and then becomes accepted at Vatican II? I would argue.
Yeah, and I'm saying if you go down to Baltimore and you talk to one of these average people, they're not going to tell you, well, in Vatican II documents it says.
No, but they don't have to because they're already indoctrinated with the indifferentism.
Well, I'd say most people are more so indoctrinated by the culture in general rather than them reading a bunch of
Yeah,
encyclicals
but
and
you're
being like,
misunderstanding. Like you got it backwards. The point is that the reason that they would have the cultural liberalism is because of the theological indifferentism. That's what I'm saying. Like if you ask them, who's God? What do you think about God? They're going to say something like, "Well, God is in all the religions and he doesn't care about the specifics and God doesn't care if I'm Protestant or if I'm Buddhist or Muslim." So they're going to automatically default to regurgitating these indifferentist principles whether they know about it in the documents or not. And they're not expressing anything different than what the errors are in the documents. So the problem is that the Roman Catholic Church is not teaching people the Trinity.
so I wish that these liberals were getting deep into theology, but I don't think that they are even picking up a single book on theology or anything. And I think an analogous situation we can look at is Nancy Pelosi. So
Sure.
with
Well,
abortion,
but they don't have to pick up a book on theology if they see the Pope going and praying in the mosque towards Mecca. That's all that's needed. That's their public pedagogy.
yeah, but whether I mean, Muslims are against abortion and homosexuality, but
So I
these
mean
people,
I can there are satanic groups that are against those things. Did you know that?
for sure, that's not my point. My main point is that they're being
What?
more influenced by society rather than
Yeah, and
being like, oh,
right.
hey, we have to agree with Muslims
Yeah,
because in Vatican II.
but that wouldn't be there if, for example, the Vatican didn't publicly teach and demonstrate that lack of faithfulness to the theological heritage of the church. So they don't. In other words, they're getting this downstream from the Vatican. The Vatican is. I mean, Vatican I says it's the teaching office that Peter established or that Jesus established Peter to have in the church. So every time you're saying that there's this giant failure, is that not implicating the Vatican?
I mean, I think it's more so implicating the individual and how much they actually care about their own theology versus
Okay.
being nice in society. I think that, and if you talk to
Okay.
like an
Well, but
average,
is your church dogmatically built on the individual, or is it built on the guy in Rome?
I mean, whether whatever that answer to that question is to anybody, I mean, we can agree
Well, the answer in
objectively.
your system, it's Vatican I says what the answer is, dude.
Yeah, but I'm saying people don't even read the catechism. Like your average liberal Catholic won't even. I'm saying we should just pick up a catechism and we should say, which is the current teaching from the Vatican about, what everyone should be in line with, depending on,
Okay, but
all the
the
nuances.
current catechism teaches the point that I just mentioned from Lumen Gentium and Nostra Aetate, that Muslims and Christians worship the same God.
Yeah, but how do you explain things like transgenderism and abortion and all the other liberal viewpoints that they also believe
So
in?
again, you can't combat the liberalism in the culture if you don't have the right theology. So you have it backwards. You think it's all about the cultural issues because of the fact that many of the Catholics don't care about theology and they're influenced by the culture. And what I'm saying is that the reason we have a lot of these problems is the other way around. Theology is what determines the errors in the culture, not the other way around.
Can you really quickly establish what you see from the Vatican to your average liberal in Baltimore? Like the chain of connection between what you're talking about to what they believe.
Well, yeah, you could look at the way that the catechism was changed in the new catechism, and then that's the catechism that most of these people have been catechized into. And then when they see what the Pope does by engaging in all of these ecumenical services, building a giant Muslim Jewish interfaith center in Abu Dhabi, they don't need to go into the theology because they already have it visibly expressed to them what the Roman Catholic position is nowadays, that it's progressed and evolved. So you're absolutely right that actions speak louder than the words. And most of these Catholics just say, well, the Pope's over here doing the prayers with the Muslims. They must be pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you established, though, that the change in the catechism was a major significant influence. And,
Well, that's
for
all
some of these.
what do you think the catechists are telling people? What do you
Yeah,
mean?
yeah. Well, I mean, I wish they were going down the catechism list and just saying all the points like, hey,
Bro,
we
the
all agree on
catechism
this.
teaches what I'm saying. That's what
Yeah, yeah.
that's
But what I'm saying is, what I'm primarily saying is that, if the catechism was such a major influence, they wouldn't also be, they'd be like, hey, the catechism says abortion is murder and, all the other liberal points. But when you bring that up to these liberal Catholics, they would say something like, well, the church can change and they're behind on science and all
yeah, and
this.
that right there proves my point. So when they say the church can change, the root there is the theological error, you see. So that's prior to the moral error that they're making that you're pointing out.
Well, I don't think they can subscribe to anything that the Vatican puts out because, I mean, their paradigm is individualist. It's themselves first, the liberal society first, and they measure what the church puts out based on what they think is like, hey, are we being nice to people with same-sex attraction?
Yeah, well, I mean, is it not Francis and his blessings of the unions that's promoting that?
Well, their definition of nice is going to be the liberal definition, which is something like you have to affirm other people's
No,
identity
no,
no
no,
matter
no.
what.
No, I mean, there's an explicit change in Francis's document about the blessing of unions, and when James Martin then immediately does the very thing with the gay couples, does that not tell everybody in that group in your group that this is cool now? Are the actions not
I
speaking
mean,
louder than the words? Is that not
yeah,
Francis's actions? I'm saying.
I'm not denying that there are variables that could push people more towards one perception over the other. Like I said, I think there should be more clarity and conviction. However, I think you're
Clarity.
going to
I mean,
find
bro,
that.
come on. Like, did Francis not make a change in blessing gay couples?
Well, I mean, that's besides the point on this.
How is it
On this,
beside the point? Is my point. What do you mean?
well, because these liberals, what I'm saying is that
It's not
they're saying,
liberals. It's theological error. You keep saying the liberals, the liberals, the liberals. This is a cope. I'm not talking about you. I'm not attacking you
no, that's
personally. I'm
fine, that's
saying that
fine.
it's a trad cat cope to say that it's all these liberals. It's Francis and it's error. It's not liberalism. It's true and false, vice and virtue, good and evil. It's not liberalism.
Yeah, well, if the argument is something like, hey, there's scandal, therefore scandal is
No, I
theologically
didn't
go.
say that. I said theological error.
Okay, I mean, Hey, I'll keep listening, and I hope I can look into it more. But I really do think out there, people are much more influenced by the culture rather than. I don't think they're looking into theology at all and looking into exactly
Yeah,
what
but
the Pope
everything in
does.
the conversation, all the examples led to the point and to the I mean, the whole thrust of the argument is that the Roman Catholic Church has not maintained the faith. So that's why these people have these mistaken views, is that uh, they've lost the heritage.
Can I ask another question that's
Sure.
separate? I appreciate the back and forth. So, um, are you gonna do a duo debate with Andrew Wilson ever?
I'm open to that. Nobody's ever discussed that, but I'm open to it. Why?
I mean, I just really like when you and him take on atheists, and I think the Matt Monkey debate, where I think that's the most decisive win I've ever seen among two actual debaters. So it'd be really cool if you jumped in the mix, and I don't know, I think it'd be good.
Yeah, I mean, I'm open to that. That's a good idea. I'll suggest that to Andrew and see if we can find somebody who is open to that. Mighty, what's up, Mighty? You got to unmute.
Oh,
Mike.
hey, I got a mic already. I just asked for one. Thanks for the invite, salty Irish girl. I don't know who you are, Jay. I just popped into the room here
Welcome.
3 minutes ago, but I guess I'm a cradle or lifelong Roman Catholic, 53, a San Francisco native, and I've lived through much, much change.
Mhm.
In fact, I was not that anybody in this day and age gives a shit. I was an usher at Pope John Paul II's Candlestick Park, Mass. The first appearance of the Pope Mobile. Of course, no,
Interesting.
I doubt anybody knows what a Pope Mobile is. September 18th,
I know what it is.
1987, I was a junior in high school. So my real problem, and by the way, I was looking up some factoids the other day just to refresh my memory. I went to 12 years of awesome Roman Catholic schools here in San Francisco, so I'm a perpetual chauvinist, sexist, fascist, a bit of a misogynist, you name it, an old school dude, right? Public enemy number one, according to our Zionist occupied, you could very well say Jewish government and all of the Western world. And so the fundamental problem I see, Vatican II, which I think ran from 1962 to 1965, was the liberalization of the Roman Catholic Church. And guys like me were not affected by it. And that's why I can see this profound change that took place, especially with, wow, what do you know? The first ever Jewish pope. Of the 266 popes, there have been, St. Peter being the first from, I think, AD 30 to AD 64. Of the 266 popes, the average papacy was 7 years long. And fatty Pope Francis I from Buenos Aires, Argentina, as I always describe him, is the first Jesuit. And I'm starting to think that that's where this, this compromised ideology and this liberalization has really taken off, because it seems Zionists or Jews, once again, have compromised every
Okay. Well,
institution in the Western world.
how then would we remain Roman Catholics, given what Vatican I teaches about the papacy, if it's been subverted by these foreign entities and has basically been taken over? And you keep saying liberalism. It has nothing to do with liberalism if it's a question of true and false theological error. That's not liberalism.
What are you asking me?
Why would we still believe Roman Catholicism if the system is invalidated via theological error at Vatican II and not just liberalism?
I don't think it's been invalidated. I think it's been compromised. I think it's been corrupt. And I think the only way out of this mess is the rise of strongman rule,
Okay.
fascism, the restoration of the masculine Christian patriarchy I grew up
So
on.
how is Vatican I true in terms of the infallibility and
I'm not familiar. I'm not
hold
familiar
on.
with that. I'm not familiar with Vatican I. I'm no
Okay, well,
theologian.
it teaches that the Roman See cannot defect and never teaches theological error.
Well, hey, all I know is that we need to get back to the America and the Western world we had about 50, 60 years ago. And I think it's inevitable, this, defiance of an almighty God's plan, if you believe in him. Hey, I go back and forth in this day and age. You know why, Jay? I have recognized a bit of blasphemy for you in the room. I don't give a shit. I'm going to be dead in a matter of decades at best. And my awesome, recently deceased, I should say, parents who are devout Roman Catholics and met at Old St. Mary's Roman Catholic Church here in the city, they're gone. And now that they're gone, I recognize that, wow, these Abrahamic religions, Buddhism, Sikhism, Taoism, you name it, they have all been created by middle-aged men like me who have an understanding of human psychology and our needs for consolation in life, a greater understanding of the who, what, when, where, how, and why of our existence. So the whole point of it is to moralize, tame, civilize the human, savage fucking animal we are surrounded by now. So I hope you understand that. You can go on and on. It seems like you are condescending, critical of, lecturing to Roman Catholics. But we ruled the roost for the longest time, and we will again. There are 2.3 billion.
I'm condescending. You basically just admitted that you're pretty much a neo-pagan atheist, but I'm the one that's condescending.
No, see, don't label me. That's the thing. If I choose to believe in God tomorrow, I can. Does that even make sense to you conceptually? You sound like a 20-year-old, an idealist.
Really?
Yeah, you do. I've heard you talk many times. I don't know who the fuck you are.
Oh, how do you not know who I am? But you've heard me talk many times.
I see your name and these interactions with.
Okay, so do you believe that we have to be consistent and coherent in our worldview, or can we just constantly contradict from one sentence to the next?
The human animal evolves for good or bad. You become, ideally, you start as an idealist. You are raised to be, like I was. I believed everything I was taught until I was 24. In San Francisco, I was pointing the finger saying, you're gay, you're having premarital sex, and
Well, it sounds to me like you're the one that's being really condescending. I haven't said anything condescending to you. I just asked you questions about the Vatican teaching, and then you immediately went over from fascism, conspiracy stuff to neo-pagan stuff. Yeah, so it sounds like your position is the one that's kind of unclear and all over the place.
Yeah, I'm tired of the condescension, the ridicule, the degradation, and the beating up of your almighty European.
Well, you don't even believe the Roman Catholic religion, so why are you mad about it?
I did for the longest time, and get this.
But you don't believe it now. So
Jay,
why would you be mad about
that? I will defend the reinstitution, even by force, of its culture in the Western world to the death. How's that? Okay, so I don't believe in God, but we will force Christian culture and morality down the throats of the fucking infidels. Right. Are you an infidel? I need to know. And if you are, give me your address.
Here's what.
I'm a Roman Catholic.
So here you notice this. He wants my address.
That's right.
Now he wants to
demand your address, you long-haired pencil neck pussy.
So there's Roman Catholicism for you right there. AI Council. No, Lewis. Yeah, I mean it's like just all over the place. But I like it when these are the best types of Roman Catholics. Lewis, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to say the guy sounds mentally ill. And he was accusing you of being an idealist, but then he's also saying, oh, we're going to force Christianity on everyone in the West, as if that's not some stupid idealism.
Exactly. AI. Yeah, I don't think that guy was very concerned with any kind of consistency. Go ahead, AI.
How many popes can there be?
It sounds like a joke. How many popes walk into a bar and what?
No, it's a sincere question. How many popes can there be at once?
There can only be one at once in their canon law.
Yeah, if we examine the events of the last 10 years, did it appear in the public sphere that we had one pope or two popes?
Benedict resigning would mean I'm sure that's I guess where you're going with this.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk a little bit about it since one of the speakers mentioned the faith dropping off in connection with Francis.
Okay,
I'm a Roman Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead. Yeah, if I can.
Well, I mean, I'll just circumvent all of that by saying that the Benedict has done all the same types of things that illustrate my arguments I was making earlier. Benedict went and prayed in the mosque towards Mecca, so he's just as much a lib as Francis.
And how would you account for Christ appearing with the Sadducees in their temple?
What now? What is, I don't understand.
How would you account for Jesus Christ appearing in the temple of the Sadducees, who were well known to have fallen away from the previous faith of their forefathers? Jesus appearing there was appearing essentially in a deadened faith environment. I compare that to
Okay, well, that's different. That's different than.
Tell me how. Yes,
that's different than teaching dogmatic error, and that's precisely what Vatican II does. And I've got Lumen Gentium 16 pulled up. You could look at Nostra Aetate. They both teach that the Muslims and the Catholics, quote, hold the same faith of Abraham and adore the same God. So adoration in Catholic theology is very specific. It's a term of worship. So this is basically saying that Muslim worship is acceptable to God.
Yeah, well, we probably agree on the interpretation of those documents, but where we disagree is you say that the creation of those documents voided the faith of the church. I would say that the creation of those documents voided those documents themselves.
No, that's just a falsifiability fallacy, because you have to hold to Vatican II. You don't get the freedom to reject the documents of Vatican II. And I can pull up 4 places in Denzinger that tells you have to teach, or you have to hold to all of the teachings of the papacy, even the things that you think might be error that are ordinary teaching.
Right. Well, as Paul VI declared, Vatican II was a pastoral council.
Yeah, that's another myth. That's a myth.
Council.
That's a myth. There's 4 places where the Vatican has stated 4 times over the Vatican II is dogma. So that's a total myth.
All right. Well, I think our disagreement is that you believe the creation of the new documents can, in effect, void the eternal faith, and I don't believe that.
No, you're holding to the schismatic position that you don't have to believe what the Vatican ratifies for the entire church. That's defined as schism 4 times over in Denzinger.
Yeah, I don't believe that every Catholic has to suspend their ratio that God gave them.
You actually do. The documents that you have to accept them with docility. Docility means you don't sit there and pick it apart, and you don't decide what you invalidate.
Okay, well, we disagree.
So you're a Protestant?
No, so I'm a Catholic.
No, you're a Protestant because you're picking and choosing which Vatican documents you want. That's Protestantism.
Well, how would you then account for the members of the Council of Trent as they might view the documents of Vatican II?
It doesn't matter. It has absolutely nothing to do with whether you as a Catholic have to accept it. In fact, I will put right underneath this the 4 statements from Denzinger that tell you have to accept those things.
Right. Well, my point would be that the members of the Council of Trent would not have accepted those things.
All that tells me is that Roman Catholicism contradicts itself and it invalidates the system. So the very argument you're making means that Roman Catholicism isn't true.
Correct. You're saying that the newer documents are the fullest expression of the faith, and I'm
No, I'm saying
saying
they
that
contradict.
documents.
No,
I'm
I'm
saying that
not saying they're a full
documents can
expression of
be
faith.
errant.
They
I'm
contradict.
saying that documents can and have been errant in the history of the church.
No, that's not you. So now you're denying Vatican I because Vatican I says that the Roman See cannot and does not teach error.
You're talking about the Petrine promise. That's the promise of Christ.
Yeah, have you read
the
Vatican I? It specifically says this.
Right, that the pontiff is preserved from teaching error.
Correct.
Which is why I wanted to bring up the topic of Francis. And I guess I'll just ask
so
you,
hold on.
has he
Does the
taught
Vatican-
error?
does the
I
Vatican
guess I'll
tell-
just ask you if he's taught error or not, in your opinion.
I mean, I just gave you the example from Lumen Gentium, where there's a contradiction saying that Muslims worship the same God and that you can go and pray in mosques now. That seems to be a contradiction from calling crusades against Muslims, wouldn't you say?
Right, and I think you're proving my point that the documents themselves can be errant, but the eternal faith cannot be errant.
So that's
man's ability.
You're denying Vatican I because you don't get the liberty in this system of picking and choosing where the documents err. And no, anything confirmed for the entire church cannot err as per Vatican I. So the system contradicts.
Right, the later document contradicts
the whole system
document.
is a contradiction because it's built a la Vatican I on what the Roman See confirms. The Roman See has confirmed a contradiction, therefore the teaching of the Roman Catholic Church about Vatican I is false, therefore Roman Catholicism is false. It only takes one dogmatic contradiction to invalidate the system.
Yeah, well, like I say, that's where we disagree. I'll just leave it at that.
Well, but how do you address that? So you don't have a response to that.
No, I gave you a response right at the very beginning.
No, your response is to basically accept contradictions and to say
you can talk over me or you can listen to my answer. You can't.
But you didn't give an answer. You just said that the system's unfalsifiable.
No, I began to give an answer and you talked over me.
No, when I came. You didn't give an answer. Jules, you just said that I don't count those documents. You don't get the liberty of picking and choosing the documents in your system. So you're consciously being contradictory. Jules.
Yeah, I really don't want to divert the discussion, but there's been a bit of topic that came out that the Roman Catholicism, medieval Roman Catholicism, but even that Paul was fighting Roman Catholicism. I don't believe that was correct. I believe the Roman Catholic system came up much, much later after the first century.
Okay. Paul, the apostle, is fighting Roman Catholicism? That doesn't make any sense. What are you talking about?
I totally agree. No, I was on X Space and tweeting about this. It had to be after the second or third century. But what do you know, my brother? What do you know? When did Roman Catholicism started?
So all of the teachings of the Orthodox Church are the same teachings of the first, second, and third century. So there is no, I don't know what it sounds like you have like a Protestant Seventh-day Adventist idea that like Constantine created the Catholic Church or something. That's not true. You can read the Church Fathers prior to Nicaea.
No. I'm not here in a combative mode. I concur that the Roman Catholic Church had to start it at least after the second century. That's my point.
No, again, this is not true. I mean, the Roman See has a succession of bishops back to Peter, just like the Church of Antioch has a succession of bishops back to Peter. So what we call the Roman Church today is the Franco-Latin Papal Church of the 7th, 8th, 9th century.
So, no, but you are not concurring that the Apostle Paul in the first century was fighting like Martin Luther. It's not the same. That's my question.
No idea what you're talking about. Luke, what's up? Luke. You gotta unmute, man.
Can you just give me 30 seconds?
Sure.
Yeah, I have information against the Catholic Church, 3 gems from Australia. Today is not the right time for that, then I yield my turn. But I do have some information, some unique insight on how the Catholic Church, at least in Australia, is with the New World Order rather than against it. It relates to.
Well, I think I would agree with that. But today we're talking about the papacy as a as a theological topic. Excuse me. Sapphire. Get to unmute.
Hey, I was curious about, you've spoken in the past about the catechism with the death penalty overriding natural law. And that's a contradiction, right? Isn't that the critique?
I would say so. Yeah.
So I was just curious, how do we know natural law? Is that only revealed through scripture, or do we use the nous? Or
Are you talking about as Orthodox or what the Roman Catholic position is?
if you could tell me both, that'd be great. I'm a Protestant looking in, and I'm interested in converting, so.
I think Roman Catholics would say that there's a lot of self-evident principles that are out there, and so philosophy and natural science through basic principles like, basic Aristotelian principles, law of non-contradiction, the laws of logic, and so forth, that through reasoning you can come to basic ideas about what the purpose of human biology is, what the purpose of different things in nature are. So it's kind of like a rational syllogistic process for a lot of Roman Catholic theologians as to what natural theology is, and then you can deduce from that, based on the idea that you're made in God's image as well, certain moral ideas about right and wrong. So in Aquinas, the moral law is based on the eternal law, which is God's own essence. So that's the Roman Catholic view. So I think they would say that natural law is in harmony with Scripture, but not derived from Scripture or revelation, just derived purely from the natural world, from the innate sense of man, that man has a sensus divinitatis in him, a sense of divinity and sense of right and wrong. So all of those things contribute to knowing, natural law and the moral good, the moral bad. I would say the Orthodox view, like Staniloy says in Orthodox Dogmatics, Volume 1, we don't believe in natural theology, but we would say there's a natural revelation that's available and present to all, and there is a kind of an internoetic element to that. Yes, that's what Paul talks about in Romans 1, that all men in their hearts know. He doesn't say their rational faculty, he says their hearts. So I think that we would say that the content, as Staniloy says there, of natural theology and natural revelation, what we're calling natural revelation, not natural theology, but what they mean, the content is the same, which is the logi, which is Christ. So Christ is the meaning of the scriptures, and he's the meaning of nature. It's just two different mediums or forms by which that content is conveyed.
So do you think Roman Catholicism falls apart with this whole rationalist endeavor to deduce all these things with natural theology? Is that the point of contention?
It's a point of contention. That's the debate that I had with Trent Warren. I mean, yeah, I think if natural theology fails, I think by default Roman Catholic system would fall. Yes.
I see.
I think the big contentious point would be, for them, the created order is not seen as a theophany. It's not a Christophany. For us, the created order is also a theophany or a Christophany.
I see. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, you might could find a Catholic theologian here or there that would agree that maybe creation is a theophany, but on the whole, that's not really part of their tradition. Mega Digital, what's up, dude? You gotta unmute. Mega Digital, are you there? Man, the allergies are really bad here today. Mega, you gotta unmute, man.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yo.
Yes, I had requested the mic for quite a while. Yeah, thanks for accepting me.
Sure.
Okay. I think that we have a situation whereby many people fall into a situation of using or failing to take into account the successionist form of theology, whereby we have to accept that at some particular point in time, at some epoch or at some era, at some particular point in time, a certain group of believers had the knowledge of the truth of God. So at some particular point in time, at some point in time, prior to the Reformation era, the Roman Catholic Church had the truth of that time. It may not have been the complete picture that God had wanted to convey throughout salvific history, but they had a certain modicum of light that they possessed, right? So that was prior to, like Rabbi Jules maybe talks about the second century or whatever. And so what I'm basically proposing, or what I'm suggesting, is that rather than people trying to look at it from a dialectic perspective of saying, is it Catholics versus who, rather look at the teachings or the doctrines that are purported by the church at certain particular periods or period or epoch in time, and assess the biblical authenticity thereof. Yeah. So when we say Paul in First Thessalonians, I believe it's in First Thessalonians, when he talks about the original man of sin, the man of lawlessness, who is already working at his time, and we fail to discount the fact that the Bible explicitly warns us that there was going to be a power that was going to arise that is going to challenge the authority of God. And this power, Paul identifies as having begun already to start to work during his time, which means at the time that Paul was preaching the gospel truth, the gospel truth which was valid for his time, there was someone who was opposing that gospel truth, right? So at every epoch or at every era throughout the church's history, when there has been a group of believers who stand up for the truth of God, there has been opposition or someone who has opposed the plan of God. You see that from Cain and Abel, Ishmael.
Okay, yeah, I'm
And
not trying to
Isaac.
be rude, but like, so what's the argument? Where are you going with this?
The argument I'm trying to say is we cannot say that there is no continuous line of opposition. Right? So you cannot say that there's Constantine, the activities of Constantine in the first century are not linked to what the Bible talks about as the activities taking place in the backdrop. You understand
Right,
what I'm
hold
saying?
on.
So
Constantine is 300. So what do you mean first century?
no, I'm talking about not first century. Sorry, that was an era. 300s. You suggested that the activities of Constantine have no relevance to the emergence of Sunday worship, right?
No, it has
You
nothing to
didn't
do with Sunday worship. The church already had a controversy called the Quartodeciminarian controversy prior to that about the church and like whether we followed the Jewish calendar, and the church was already worshiping on Sunday. So that played into that controversy, pointing out that no, we're not following the Jewish calendar strictly. We are the church, and so we worship on Sunday, the day of resurrection, not the Jewish Sabbath, although Orthodox churches still do honor the Sabbath on the Saturday Vesper service.
Okay, so the emergence of Sunday worship, whose mechanization or whose device is that, according to
Okay,
your
well, we're not.
understanding?
We're not here to debate Seventh Day Adventist stuff. Says in the book of Acts that they worshipped on the first day of the week. Let's see. Taboo. No, he left. No, taboo. Get on mute.
Hey, how's it going, Jay?
Yes, sir.
Was curious about. I'm coming from a Protestant upbringing, so this is a quite a basic question. Was curious about the bridge between Catholicism and Orthodoxy on the subject of purgatory.
Well, if you read St. Mark of Ephesus sermons or homilies about purgatory, you'll get the Orthodox view. There's no such thing as a created fire from God. Paul says God is an all-consuming fire, and so the fire of God is the presence of God. It's the uncreated energies of God. It's the divine light. So we would never conceive of some sort of payment system in the afterlife where you got to pay off all these temporal debts. I mean, that's the essence of the Roman Catholic view of purgatory, is that you're paying off your accrued temporal debts for sins. So God's a giant Talmudic bean counter. We don't believe that. We think it's just simply terminology that Paul's using for the presence of God. It's not like he's literally burning people to, test their to test. God's a giant metallurgist or something. He's like a gnome who's like forging everybody in a giant metallurgical process. We don't think that. We would say that it's the presence of God. But I do think there's an ascent of the soul after death, which is excuse me, our view of the toll houses. But that has nothing to do with purgatory. It's a totally different thing.
Thanks, man. You and Harrison are the best on Infowars, so keep it up.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, Harrison's a really cool guy. We've hung out a few times. So people are always bitching about why you keep coughing. So wherever we moved, it has like the worst grass allergies, it turns out. So we're right next to this giant, like 12-mile, like swamp preserve, and it turns out the grasses and the trees are just like the worst at this time. So that's why I constantly cough like that. It's not anything I plan to do. Uriel.
What's up? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. How you doing?
Good, man. What do you mean that God is not a giant Talmudic bean counter?
That if you
No,
had
I'm just joking. It was a joke.
If you had this idea that like all your temporal debts are like stored up on a ledger, and you have to pay it with like 2,433 years in purgatory, to me that just sounds preposterous.
No, I know. I was just joking, but I just wanted to kind of say something. I requested to speak earlier. Just the guy, he kept bringing up liberals. It's how you believe about God in this world is how you act in this lifetime, and what the Brahmin Indians believe about their God is why India is the way it is, and like
Absolutely.
and why Muslims believe what they believe about their God is why Islamic countries are the way they are. So you can't blame the culture for your theology. I know you probably already said that, but I just wanted to kind of hammer that home. That's why you see other cultures that in my opinion, are just lesser. They're just not as good as certain other cultures, and that's because of how they believe about God. It's that simple.
Yeah, there's a reflexive relationship between the law of praying as the law of believing, but also the law of believing affects the lifestyle. So both of those, it's symbiotic. It goes both ways. It's not always an either or. I mean, Father Moses always makes the point that a lot of times heresy, the reason people go into heresy is some kind of like serious moral flaw. And so the moral flaws that they have, like for example, Skittles, Skittles oftentimes manifest as like some weird theological deviation down the road. Where I'm serious, I think he's right about that. I'm not saying every heretic is gay, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I got you. One more thing, I was wondering about the natural law thing. That guy brought that up. In my opinion, tell me what you think about this. I see when I see natural law, or like when a human studies the eternal laws of nature, like we can watch nature and see how it is. From my perspective, when if I were like an ancient person and I were to like study the laws of nature, it's almost like the transcendental argument for God in a way, because it's like the more you study this there's only one logical answer, that God made this. What do you think about that?
Well, I think ultimately those principles definitely point to God, and it's not like we're saying that there's not purpose or telos or causation in the world or meaning in the world. But the contention, I think, is the Thomistic epistemology and the attitude that they have that a lot of this stuff is just self-evident, and it really ends up being inadequate when there's a challenge from like post-enlightenment philosophy. So when people don't accept self-evident principles, they don't really have any response.
All right. Well, yeah, that's about all I wanted, man. I appreciate you. I've been listening to you for a long time, man. Keep doing what you're doing. God bless you, and God bless all you guys. See ya.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Jules, did you want to discuss something else? You have to unmute if you want to say something.
Are you talking to me?
You're Jules, right?
Where do you and I have a disagreement? I'm trying to understand where you and I have a disagreement.
Remind me what you were talking about. I've already been distracted. What were you discussing?
When this is the question, maybe I'll ask you a question. When did the papacy started? That's my question.
Well, my answer was that what we today know of as the papacy, I would say, goes back to the Franco-Carolinian Latin papal period of 7th, 8th, and 9th century.
That's fair. Now, Jay, what I was trying to explain to you, and it happens on this platform, this is what I was trying to explain to you. Some individuals, this is my point, listen very carefully. Some individuals believe that the papacy started with the Apostle Peter. I don't agree with that.
Okay,
That's my
so
point.
you're probably talking about interactions that you've had with Catholics that are talking about apostolic succession from Peter and the keys given to Peter and all that. As Orthodox, we agree with them on that point. We just don't believe that Peter was given all these special positions via Vatican I.
No, I understand your point of view. When I think about the universal church, that's what the Catholic Church is. It did not start with Peter. That's my contribution.
Well, I mean, it starts in the sense of Peter confessing in Matthew 16, and we wouldn't have a problem as Orthodox people agreeing to that. We just don't think that it ends up being, all these outlandish claims that you get in Dictatus Papae that the Pope is the Quisatz Haderach.
Even more specifically, Jay, more specifically, Mary was never something to be worshipped in the first century.
Okay, well, Mary is revered; she's venerated. She's not worshipped like we worship God. And I
Thank
just did
you.
a whole 40-minute video that you could watch about why we view Mary that way.
Okay, no problem. At least you brought me back up. I appreciate that, Jay.
No problem. And Scylla. It's taking a minute to connect. While that's connecting, Taboo. You have to unmute, man.
Oh, my bad. I didn't see that.
It's okay.
You got so that I wanted to ask about, and I had this was one of my. This isn't directly related to the papacy or anything like that, but it was one of my questions about orthodoxy. Just when I was discovering it for the first time, and I believe it's today, if I'm not mistaken. But the holy fire in Jerusalem. I was curious on the basis of that, because when I first, again, being from a Protestant upbringing, when I first heard of the holy fire, I was unfortunately just somewhat skeptical about this, and I was curious of the basis for it, and just the whole thing behind the holy fire.
Well, you can go look. There's some good documentaries on YouTube you could look up about that. But today we're talking about the papacy. So, and Scylla, what's up? Malik, go ahead. You have to unmute.
Hey, Jake. I have a question about miracles, because when it comes to miraculous deeds, it seems like in Second Timothy's that the Antichrist, he'll come with like seemingly false miracles, miraculous deeds. So my question is like, how are they proof for like anything?
Well, again, I would agree with that. I mean, miracles are, if you read the book of Jude, it says Jannes and Jambres mimic the first two miracles of Moses. So, if every religion, every group out there claims miracles. So, how are you going to know the true faith just based on miracle claims? So, I think miracles do attend the true faith, but they can't be in themselves proofs.
So like, let's say Craig, or like William Lane Craig, let's just talk about him. His big argument that you usually see from him is like, well, the crucifixion, therefore we should accept Christianity. You would negate that type of view, right?
I've never thought that's a good argument. I mean, the crucifixion only makes sense in light of the rest of the theological revelation about who Christ is, his divine person, his mission, his ascension. Like, there's plenty of people in the Old Testament who, were resurrected, came back to life. Does that mean, well, maybe not plenty of them, but, at least in the case of Elisha's bones, right? So, like, what does that prove in itself without the rest of the story? It doesn't prove really anything.
So you'd see like prophecy in the grand narrative itself is better evidence or proof for Christianity.
Yeah, I think the messianic prophecies are a much better argument than, oh, here's some evidences that it's very possible and highly likely that maybe this guy was risen from the dead. I mean, there's a place to have that evidence and that argument when people say, like, if somebody says there's no evidence or extra canonical proof of Jesus existing or rising from the dead. I mean, at that point, it's perfect to bring in the evidential replies. But just the so-called evidentialist proof of the resurrection of Jesus, that itself doesn't prove Christianity.
Now, I just have a final question to ask. Like, what's your opinion on Mysterianism in regards to Trinitarian views? Like, someone that says, well, he sees the Trinity as a mysterious thing, or it's like a mystery.
I think every theological position has an element of mystery in it because of the nature of God. I mean, if God is transcendent and, all the various categories and attributes that we give to God, then there's going to be an element of mystery. But if you put the mystery so fundamental that it's, God's unknowable or totally transcendent, or it's equivalent to irrational, I would think that's problematic, because I think that really the Trinitarian view is the best case, I guess you could say, for how a lot of logical principles, universals, etc., how they're grounded. So if my theological position ultimately, I mean, it just depends on what people mean by mystery. I mean, I'm not familiar with Mysterianism, I haven't heard of this, but if it's equated to irrationalism, I would say no, there's a difference between something being super irrational and something being irrational.
That's basically all I had to ask for the day. I mean, I don't really have. I don't agree with you on tag, really, the transcendental argument, epistemically.
Okay. Well,
others.
I mean, I don't think we have any other Roman Catholics right now. So, what do you disagree with?
Oh, I'm not Roman Catholic, but
no, I'm saying that there's not any other Catholics in line to speak. So, go ahead and make your point.
So, usually, when it comes to the transcendental argument for the existence of God, I have a couple of questions about the assumptions of it. Does it like assume that that God has some sort of obligations towards us when it comes to our rational faculties, that they must correspond to reality at some level?
Sure.
So God does have obligations to us.
Oh wait, you said does God have obligations? I don't know what is that. I don't know what that means.
Is it necessary that God makes people basically rational, that our rational faculties correspond to reality as it is? And because,
Well, if by necessary you mean did God choose to set up the world that way because we're made in His image and that thus we are rational like Him? Yes. If by necessary you mean was He under some sort of constraint of essentialism that He had to produce beings that way? No, because He created beings that are not rational. So there's no necessity to create all beings that way, but He chose to make man in His image, and so man has then a corresponding faculty of reason, which allows him to understand and study the world, and that the principles of the world match up to what's in man's mind.
So I can see how you kind of tie this together with the grand narrative of biblical scripture and revelation, with God, like Imago Dei, in relation to the Logos, right? And
Sure.
okay, so I can kind of see. And it's
Okay,
not
but what's a problem for tagging any of that?
So usually when people are making the presuppositional approach, what I usually see some people object with is a type of epistemic fallibilism. Basically, because they're rejecting the foundationalism of an Aristotelian, but they will accept certain things which are necessary for reason, but other things are like our common sense faculties, like our intuitions towards, let's say, induction, or
Okay, but those are not that's not the same thing as like an epistemic view of foundationalism. So believing that the world is constructed a certain way, or that we have, you could even say we have axiomatic beliefs. The problem is not saying that those things exist, it's the account that's given for those things, or the assumption that those things are theory neutral. That's the point of contention. Do you think there's things that are theory neutral?
well, it seems like for someone to even reason, there are things that you have to presuppose to begin with. And I agree with you
Okay,
there.
but that doesn't have anything to do with it being theory neutral.
Yeah.
I mean, a foundationalist and a presuppositionalist, a coherentist, can all agree that there are fundamental things.
Yeah.
But
So I agree with you there.
So there's a difference between having foundational beliefs and foundationalism as an epistemology. Those are different things.
Yeah. So I was saying that I agree with you here, right? That there are things that are necessary for you to, be able to do to even have rational discourse. Like there has to be like real resemblances at some level for you to talk about cats, dogs, women, men. Aristotle is a man. To even do that syllogism, you need that as a real thing. It can't just be like a concept in your head. I get that, right? But it seems as if, how do I say that? Someone doesn't really need to have certainty about the reliability of the faculty in order to actually use the faculty. Do you get what I'm saying?
But I can concede that too without conceding foundationalism.
So you would say, then I would have a question to ask you. Then what's
There's plenty of people that don't know anything about epistemology and don't know anything about grounding their presuppositions or their axioms or whatever. But that really has nothing to do with whether foundationalism is true. I mean, the question ultimately falls on self-evidence. So I would say the two main issues are that I'm taking away here is that you would have to defend that there are things that are theory neutral and that there are things that are self-evident. And I just don't understand how anybody could, and I'm not knocking you, but I'm saying if you're familiar with these disciplines and these principles, like how could you defend that? Like what's the proof for that?
Yeah, I definitely don't think that these things are in some way self-evidently true, because that would just fall into the common sense reliabilism of someone like, let's say, Thomas Reed, who would just be like, this is just common sense, right? But, common sense ain't that common, if you get what I'm saying.
Well, I think common sense, Reed and those kinds of people, like the Scottish common sense philosophers, like they also assume it's just another form of foundationalism, and it's kind of pragmatism mixed in. But none of that has anything to do with like epistemic justification. They tend to kind of just dismiss it and hand wave that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, but what does this have? How's any of this a problem for tag? I'm still not understanding how this relates to tag.
So my thing is, when it comes to tag, is that I don't see it as really necessary to propose it for the reliability or actually the use or the usability of the faculties or reason. It just doesn't seem as if it's a necessity in a rational sense.
Okay, well then, what is reasoning? So you're appealing to something that you think is more clear or more immediate or self-evident than God's existence, and you're saying something like reasoning. Well, I mean, what is reasoning? How would you give an account of reasoning without, this sort of meta level picture?
Well, I'm talking about stuff like, syllogistic reasoning, like talking about logic.
Okay, so
Talking
how does
about,
any of so if I ask you at a meta level question, metalogical level, like what is a syllogism? How do you give an account for that? That's self-evident.
I don't really think that's self-evident, but I would say that
Then
to
you're admitting
participate,
then you're
yeah,
admitting my
yeah,
point.
like I'm kind of saying that like to participate in certain discourses and get
No, this
truth
is
from,
I see. This
yeah,
is a category error. So the use of the thing doesn't equate to the justification or the account of a thing.
yeah, but I'm saying also at the same time that you don't really need to justify everything. Like it's just it can be wrong. I can
Oh,
be an error. It's like a fallibilist type of thing. Like I don't really need to be 100% certain that this necessarily it leads to
okay.
skepticism at the end of
No,
the day.
it doesn't lead to skepticism. It's a refutation of skepticism. So I think you're misunderstanding. Like what you just said would lead to skepticism.
Yeah, I'm talking about myself. That my view leads to skepticism at the end of
Correct.
the day.
Oh well, then
And,
that's self-refuting. That's a defeater for knowledge.
well, that's true. The problem would be that you have to reconstrue how you even conceive of knowledge to begin with in a
Well, so
total.
wait, you're admitting that your position leads to skepticism versus
Yes, I
tag?
admitted that like openly,
Oh,
like the type of epistemic
well, I'm just so
skepticism.
surprised that you said that. So, like,
Yeah,
okay, well, this is why tag is legit,
yeah,
because your
because
position
I admit,
is what it
right?
leads to. Oh,
Like
okay.
I
Well,
admit,
then, so you don't have to justify. If you don't have to justify knowledge, then you can't do argumentation, and I can be arbitrary.
yeah, I also don't believe that. So like it's like this really weird position I'm in as a person. I would call myself a type of fallibilist. That it's
Okay, ought we accept fallibilism?
ought. I don't believe in like moral oughts, but
Okay, well, that's another impossibility because if there's no oughts, then you can't predicate the true versus the false. You can't say the good versus the bad, and that would undercut any kind of debate or argumentation.
I would also disagree with that.
How would you disagree if you just said that you don't believe in oughts?
Well, the thing is, when it comes to oughts and talking about truths, I'm not saying that you ought to believe in any particular thing.
All right, so there's no logical okay, so there's no logical force to follow the true versus the false, and therefore your fallibilism isn't true.
It's how do I say this? Something not being, that you ought to follow the truth does not necessarily mean that that's not particularly true. I think that's a little bit of a jump in reasoning there. So like just because I don't believe in like let's say oughts that I ought do X, Y, or Z does not mean that
Okay, but every argument that you make, you're trying to the presupposition is that your position is true and that people ought to follow it. And then you're saying, but there's no oughts and you ought not follow it. Okay, cool. Then I guess there we go. that precludes the possibility of debate. All right. Jules, did you want to say something? So today, I don't mind talking about the tag discussion. That was an interesting chat there. But we're talking about the papacy, particularly if you have a disagreement on the papacy, you want to argue the Roman Catholic papal position. You can have the microphone. You're welcome to come and make whatever arguments you want. You will not be interrupted unless you commit a fallacy or try to argue about me being a KGB Panamanian drug lord. At that point, I will interrupt you. Seeker. Yes, sir.
Think of how in the with Pope Gregory, how he talks about the title of universal being like one of honor, and kind of like speaking about how the papacy is given this honor of the Petrine See because it's one of the three that Peter established, and I think it's very clear like what he's talking about, and so I like totally see how the Orthodox position is historical. I just have a hard time wrapping my head around how the Roman See can fall away, like the providence behind this. And also,
in our view, every see can fall away. They can also come back, right? I mean, Patriarch Constantinople's been a heretic multiple times.
Yeah. I mean,
like Nestorius.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I see that. Okay. And also,
I mean, Romans 11, Paul says, he warns the Roman church, you too can be cut out. You have the warning in the letters to the 7 churches of Asia Minor that you can have your lampstand removed.
Right. Yeah. So I'm like wondering too, like, so where does the Roman Church get this idea of like in the 11th century when it's like you have to submit to us or like there's no salvation outside of like where does this, is this all like forgeries? Like I'm like trying to trace.
No,
like where
I think there's a gradual evolution of these ideas. There's an accretion of these ideas. There's a series of forgeries that kind of pop up from donation of Constantine, Sammachian forgeries, Galatian decretals. I mean, there's a whole bunch of these that pop up. There's quotes and statements that are pretty common, generic, that are then kind of reinterpreted and given a meaning that they never had, like Rome has spoken cases closed. I mean, there's a whole litany of things that go along with this, as well as geopolitical events, such as the fall of Rome, that being kind of the only culturally cohering force in the West after the fall of Rome. I mean, there's a lot of factors I think that go into how it became, what we see in Dictatus Papae versus what we see, in the earlier centuries.
Oh. All right, that makes sense. Thanks, Jay.
Yeah, those are good questions. I think if a lot of the literature today pretty much agrees with that, even from the Vatican, right? I mean, you can go look at the Alexandria document. You could look at Francis Dvorak, his books. I mean, that's kind of where the scholarship is now that even the Vatican approves and accepts. Wolf. Wolf, you were there and then you dropped off. Jules, did you want to say something else about whatever?
Jay, where do you want the discussion to go? I'm not a Roman Catholic.
Bro, it says very clearly in the title what the discussion is. What do you mean?
It says Roman Catholics are welcome.
It says papacy debate. So what do you, it's right there. What do you mean?
Jay.
Jules.
Where do you want the discussion to go?
Okay, we're done. Mark, are you there? I don't know why everybody's having a hard time connecting. Young, let's see, Matthew. Then we'll go to Young Logo. Yes, sir. What's up, man? What's on your mind?
Hey, how are you doing? Nice to talk to you.
I'm doing great.
So I'm not a Roman Catholic, so I'm not going to be defending the papacy, but it doesn't seem as if there's an overabundance of Catholics in the chat wanting to do that. So I was just wondering, Have you ever heard a convincing response to the arguments made by Edward Denny? I think around status cognitum, where basically he surveys the patristics and compares kind of their interpretations
Yeah,
to
it's like the
later Roman
first or
Catholic.
second chapter of the Denny book.
Yeah, I'm a Protestant, so I am a Denny enjoyer. But I haven't seen, like I enjoy some Roman Catholic apologists, but it seems as if like the papacy, which really is the foundation of their religion, is not something that many of them are very eager to defend. I
Well, it
think
gets harder and harder is the problem. So
right. I think Eric Ibarra is probably the best popular one out there, but I haven't even seen him deal with the fact that the early church just did not have the interpretation of certain biblical texts that
right.
Rome in her later times has said, look, if you don't interpret in this way, you're outside the church.
Correct. And then they've walked back all of that, post Vatican II.
Right. I mean, the church post Vatican II is Muslims.
Yeah.
It seems to me as I read certain Vatican II and later documents that the church is kind of like a gradation of truth. I don't know if that's how Rome would have described it itself, but that's how I interpret it. But anyway, but have you seen like convincing counter responses to what Denny brings up, like maybe alternative surveys of what the patristics say about those biblical texts?
I mean, there's like the Bishop Gasser Relatio text, which it's not directly addressing Denny, but that would probably be something they would go to. I have another book that I just got from the Roman Catholics, but I didn't bring it down here to this house. It's at my other house, so I'm not sure. I don't remember the title of it. It's the one about authority. I forget who the author is, but a lot of times what they'll do, the only reason I got those, because not the Relatio one, but the other one, it's more of a recent book. So they kind of have these texts that they'll go to as their sort of default. And I'm sure that some of those more recent books try to address some of these arguments, but I mean, I just think there's only so much mileage that they have when it comes to getting into the nitty gritty of explaining these things, because they're, if you look at Richard Price, like when he goes on Reason of Theology, and they're like, assuming that Leo teaches universal jurisdiction, and he's like, there was no universal jurisdiction at that time, and then they're all like dumbfounded.
I would imagine Price seems to me to be more on the liberal side, and it seems like most liberal Roman Catholics in the academy don't even believe that there was a singular Bishop of Rome until 150
exactly.
or so. I actually don't. I'm not totally convinced by that. I think it's based off of the reading of the Shepherd of Hermas, but that is what the Roman Catholic academics say.
Correct, and then the trads will also the trads will hand wave that and say we don't care about any of that. And then when they go to the trad text, they're basically and they end up reciting and regurgitating forgeries.
Right. There does seem to be a major gap between Roman Catholic academics and apologetics.
Absolutely.
I'm not saying that there are not. So there are some very, very bright Roman Catholic apologists out there, but there does seem to be that kind of.
Can you show me to them? I haven't found them. I'm just joking.
I think Trent's a smart guy.
It's a joke. It's a joke.
Yeah. Let me see. So the next part of my question was basically, if you have this patristic data that shows that the church, I mean, obviously we don't have everything from the early church, but it's pretty comprehensive. When you look at the patristic data, the way they interpret like Matthew 16:18, the first interpretations of those texts that have kind of a papal nature are, surprise, surprise, coming from the Church of Rome. And so, but is there a way to kind of escape the force of Denny's argument without sort of falling back on kind of a Newmanian development hypothesis?
I think what they'll end up doing is say that there are many areas in the Church Fathers where there's differing interpretations, and not everybody was right. So even the majority can be wrong. So that's probably where they would go. They would probably say something like, you could make an analogy maybe to, if I was a Roman Catholic apologist, I'd make an analogy to the canon of Scripture, and I would say,
Sure.
a lot of different church fathers had different canons of Scripture,
Sure. Yeah.
and they can't all be right. So therefore, we need this, single dude to call the shots.
I think a problem for that, this might not be as applicable to you as an Eastern Orthodox, but as a Protestant, there was I don't have the quote with me, but I could find it. A Roman bishop, either during the time of the Reformation or shortly thereafter, he made a statement that he doesn't want to interpret Scripture any other way that has been interpreted by the consensus of the fathers. I think that Denny brought that up in his book.
Oh,
and then he
yeah.
says, like, look, if you actually survey the consensus of the fathers, it's not the Roman view.
Well, no, actually, Roman Catholic apologists will cite that, that phrase from St. Vincent of Lorraine, right? That whatever is believed everywhere, always, by all.
Sure.
But then
in the early church, that's not very much, really. That's
exactly, yeah. They'll trot that phrase out and then apply it in a double standard, non-consistent way.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Okay.
And by the way, Leo the 13th, Satis Cognitum, says that this was always believed from the earliest days. So
right. I don't see a way out of that, and like I'm a little bit hesitant to take certain turns of phrase and just put a huge amount of emphasis behind it, because I mean you can do this to the Bible too. Like an Arian could take Jesus saying the Father is greater than I and say, well, this proves Arianism. It doesn't. There's a broader context that has to be interpreted. But it does seem that, like, if you're going to do like a normal, reasonable hermeneutic where you want to look at direct statements, and then you want to look at the broader context, and then you want to look at the overall sweep, it does seem to me that when you do that, you still don't come up with something let alone like the Vatican I papacy. I don't think you even get like a post-schism papacy.
Yeah, I agree.
Right. So to your knowledge, there really aren't very many great comebacks to that. Like the ones that I've seen have basically come down to, this was unwritten tradition, or this was something the church had to work out the same way they worked out the Trinity. And what inevitably comes up, it seems, is they'll quote someone like Justin Martyr, who I have a great deal of regard for, and who I do think did have probably a deficient Christology. I don't think his Christology was as bad as people often say, but they'll say, well, look here, like you have an early father who doesn't have a perfect view of who Christ was, so we can't expect the early church to have this perfect view.
Well, but remember, all of this is undercut by the logic of Vatican I, which is basically that this is how you recognize the church.
Yes.
So if we want to, so why would we be deficient in even understanding how to recognize the church for so many centuries and millennia, if this was always the correct, clear view? So it's just it's just absurd all around. I mean, why is it not in the creed? I mean, if this is the true church and how to recognize it, where is this in the creed?
Mm-hmm.
And we also, have one Holy Catholic Apostolic, but that has nothing to do. Nobody in the Eastern Church understood that to be embodied in the Roman bishop.
Sure, and it also seems to me like Christology, and I mean even Trinitarian theology, it's in many ways like it involves a lot of interpretation and discussion. But the papacy is an institution. That
right.
If it's something that was ordained by Jesus, you think it would be there, Right. And I'm not saying we have everything from the early church, but you think it would be more obvious than it is. Like maybe a similar thing would be like something like the institution of the Lord's Supper. Like it's something that's there, and not everyone has like the exact same understanding of it, but everyone's doing it. Everyone, pretty much knows what it is.
Right.
It's just, and people talk about it. I mean, Justin talks about it, but he's not talking about the papacy in that same way as something that is directly given by Jesus to the church.
Well, and who actually believes that what Jesus had in mind when he was walking around with his disciples was what we read in Dictatus Papae or Unum Sanctum.
No, what Jesus had in mind was a giant bank in Rome that fundraises for
Correct.
criminal enterprises and stuff. That's
Well,
exactly
Jesus
what Jesus.
wanted the Vatican Bank to infiltrate and convert the international banking structure, you see. And
Right.
that's
Yeah.
also why they're tied into organized crime and human trafficking, is so that they can convert the human traffickers and the mobsters.
Right. Well, they're part of the church too. So, I don't want to take up too much airtime if there's other people who need to talk, but I did have one question. What do you think would be the strongest case that you've ever heard, be it in writing or from a Roman apologist as to the papacy? I think the strongest one for me would be it's kind of weird, but the authority that the Bishop of Rome did have in the early days. But to me, you can't really conceptually tie that with Vatican I. There seems to be such a divide there that it doesn't really work. But what would you say, would be the strongest case you've heard?
I mean, I guess the strongest case might be some of the phraseology that's used in different letters and by different people at different times to describe, the Bishop of Rome as head or something like that. But then you find that same phraseology used elsewhere. You find Matthew 16. Yeah, you have the same phraseology of Matthew 16 and head and all that used for people that are clearly not the Pope. So it's like,
right. Yeah.
I just don't know what. I don't know. Lewis maybe could speak to that better than me. He probably knows it better because he's worked, pretty closely with Ubi a lot. He would probably know a better argument or case than I would.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. Well, I appreciate it, Jay. This is my first time.
Yeah. Lewis, did you want to say something? Go ahead.
I'm gonna be real. So I'm listening to this in the background, so sometimes I'm tuning in and sometimes I'm not. If you repeat what exactly it was, I might be able to.
The question was basically, what do you think is like the strongest Roman Catholic papal case, from your perspective?
I don't really think there is one. If I had to pick one, maybe Pope Agatha's letter. Maybe.
Yeah, I was going to say some of the phraseology or terminology in some of the letters.
Because I'm a Protestant, I guess that doesn't have as much weight for me, because Agatha would be a saint in your church too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because that's what I've heard people like Ibarra and Lofton use to kind of leverage the kind of the saintly prestige of Agatha's name. Well, see, even saints said this. To me though, it does seem to be kind of more like a kind of regal language that shouldn't be interpreted literally. So even if
that very council, the same council excommunicates Pope Honorius. The same council,
right?
The same council. If they had the papal mindset, they would have just looked to Lateran 649, which had already condemned monothelitism. So,
right, yes, yeah, exactly. Okay, well, I will jump off, and hopefully some Roman Catholics will jump in. Thank you for taking my call, Jay. This is my first time ever calling into anything ever, so I appreciate it.
Great chat.
Okay, bye.
Young Logo, what's up, man? I did taste some honey, so the local honey has seemingly helped my coughs. I also took some holistic allergy medicine, so I'm not coughing right now.
Yo, what's up, man?
Young Logo.
I think there's a lag.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, I think I'm good now. Okay. But Jay, everyone knows it's the Universal Catholic Church. I kid. I guess my question just has to do with a little bit of that geopolitical stuff, because it seems evident that a lot of the moves that the Catholic Church is making is towards universal, in the sense of like the most amount of converts, the Pope clearly sees himself as kind of like the steward of all religions. So how would you address some of those points where some Catholics seem to be more interested in conversion in terms of like the overreach that it has, especially with like big names like Candace Owens and Russell Brand? Like how would you respond to some of those objections?
Well, what exactly is the objection?
It's not objection, but like using like conversion as like a proof of like truth.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's somebody sent me a. I'm trying to pull it up. My bookmark isn't working here. So somebody sent me a. Let me see if I can link it over here for you guys. So there's a thread that somebody put up that's illustrative of this point. I'll put it underneath here if this link works. Yeah, here it is. So basically, somebody said, one of these Roman Catholic profiles was saying, look, we have where's it at? I can't get this stupid thing to work. Hold on. Maybe this guy's thing is private or something. That's why I can't share it. Okay, so basically, here we go. 600 million people supposedly have converted and submit to the Pope in the regions of Brazil, Mexico, Philippines. Or one guy said 300 million, one guy says 600 million. I'm not sure which one's right. But when you actually go and look at the status of the religion there, you have basically large numbers of charismatic Catholics, which I don't think is legitimate religion at all. I think it's a delusion. You have 120 million of those who claim that they have had a life-changing event through the promotion of Catholic charismaticism from Paul VI. So gigantic portions of these people down there. And by the way, the next selection talks about the prevalence of Santa Muerte amongst Mexican Roman Catholics. So the reality is that these big numbers they're always touting are basically just a bunch of pagans who have no catechesis and no idea of what Christianity really is. So these numbers are inflated. And by the way, the very post that I put up yesterday about the declining numbers in the West of Roman Catholic Church attendance, vocation, etc., the Catholics started responding with our argument that, well, numbers don't matter, bro. It's the true faith. It's the true faithful. Oh, really? I thought numbers mattered all this time against Orthodox because we didn't have the big numbers, bro. We didn't have the billions, bro. And yet the numbers now don't matter when it comes to their collapsing, Eastern Seaboard parishes like Baltimore going from 60, 70 parishes to whatever, 30 or something. So again, and why would the numbers matter? I mean, Maximus, if the same trad cats make the argument that the numbers didn't matter in the Arian crisis, so do the numbers matter or not?
Right, because like the church can get to the point where it can dwindle a number where only a few hold to the correct doctrine, and even then.
Yeah, Maximus says if the number of true Catholics was dwindled to a small band, he says I would be amongst them.
Yeah, so it's always it's something that's always brought up about like by the fruits of by their fruits you'll be able to recognize the church, and it's like, what do you mean? Is it the quantity of the fruits or is it the quality of the fruit?
It's whatever is needed at the time. So if they need to use the argument that big numbers proves it, they'll use that. If they need to move the goalpost and say that small numbers proves it, they'll use that. If they need to say that corruption proves it, they'll say that. Oh, we'll see how corrupt we are. That proves we're persecuted, so that proves us. Then they'll turn around and say, look at you Orthodox, you have the same problems. You can't be the true church because you have a gay bishop over here. Oh, wait a minute. I thought persecution proved that we're the true church if you're a Roman Catholic. You see, it's just total double standards all the time.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Jay. I appreciate you taking the time to answer my question.
So, Mark, you want to try again? Baltimore Catholics reeling after Archdiocese proposes closing 40 of the 61 parishes. And underneath this, all the Roman Catholics are like, oh, it's just because boomers don't care about going and they want to move to the suburbs. Boomers moving to the suburbs, really? Or is it because that's the very diocese that had like 600 abuse cases? Oh, it's just the libs. There's not really any pedos. It's just the libs. It's the libs, dude. Go ahead, Mark. Unmute. Are you there? You're on. You're unmuted. Can we hear you? Hello? Did you turn your mic permissions on, bro? We can't hear anything. More than 150 priests abused over 600 kids the last several decades in Baltimore Archdiocese. Oh, but no, it's just because the boomers are moving to the suburbs. Okay, it's nothing to do with 150 pedo priests in Baltimore. Nothing to do with that at all. That's not why the Baltimore Archdiocese is collapsing. It's everything but that. Wow, we don't usually get 160 in here on these. So if anybody would like to come to the microphone, it's open forum. Just request to speak and I'll bring you up. We're not live on YouTube, so you can be freer with your terminology, I guess you could say. So request to speak, I'll give you the microphone. You can say whatever arguments you want. The only requirements are that you keep it to actual argumentation. We're not debating what you think about me, how mean I am, how many pounds of Panamanian cocaine I've trafficked, my years in the KGB as an assassin. None of that is on the table today. It's all admitted. It's all out there. I was for about 20 years a KGB assassin, working with Pablo Escobar, moving that blow. If you watch the Johnny Depp movie Blow, that's about me. So I'm awaiting Dugan's orders today. So anyway, we got 160 people. Nobody wants to argue for Roman Catholicism. I sent this out. I tagged like every Roman Catholic I could think of, except for Trent. I didn't think Trent would come, so I didn't tag him. 160 people. Nobody wants to talk about Roman Catholicism except for one Fed anger spewing boomer from 2 hours ago. So that guy was pretty entertaining. Seemed pretty crazy. So so Jules is calling me a coward because I won't debate 7-day Adventism when it says clear as day that the title of this discussion is a papacy debate. It has nothing to do with 7-day Sunday Adventist worship. This is time to block this dude. Yeah, and so for those that are interested, a couple of the really good academic texts for this. Of course, the Denny book is a little bit older. It's called Papalism. It's really good. But more recently, the Szyszynski book, The Papacy and the Orthodox, is really good as well, especially the chapter that deals with the patristic period. That one's really good. And then the more recent Papadakis Meyendorff book, Christian East and the Rise of the Papacy, is, I think, the best of recent note. I got Louth's book, Greek East and Latin West. It was more of a history. It's not that great, so I wouldn't recommend it, but it's okay. But these other texts, I think, are a lot better. I would also recommend Roman Catholics read the Alexandria document because we have there really some of the strongest admissions of recent note. It goes much further than the 2016 Chieti document, which at the very bottom admits that the Roman bishop did not exercise universal supremacy and jurisdiction in the first millennium. And then it goes on to admit basically another 90%, I would say, of the Orthodox arguments. So here's all these Roman Catholics that are tagging Taylor. Dude, Taylor Marshall's not going to debate me. So you're just wasting your time trying to tag. He's not going to come in here. He blocked me like 5 years ago. So we got other Roman Catholics saying that they're going to pray for me. Okay, well, why don't you, this guy's a Protestant. Well, I appreciate that, but why don't you come and defend your position? So if you've got a good, solid argument, why don't you come make it? I know out of this 160 people, there's got to be a Roman Catholic in here. Daniel, what's up, man? Y'all Roman Catholics have been y'all been sassy all week. Y'all been saucy and sassy all week long, just running victory laps. We got Russell Brand, we got Candace Owens. Go ahead, get on mute, dude.
Yep.
Hey, what's on your mind?
So I wanted to ask about Orthodox ecclesiology. So like, understand that Catholics. So I'm a Catholic. Oh, hold up. We have two people.
One at a time. Go ahead.
Here, I'll mute. I'll let him go.
Oh, well, you were first, so you can go. But whatever.
I'll mute. He can go first.
I'm ready.
Go ahead. What's up, man?
Hey, you can hear me?
Yeah, I can. What's up?
So, I mean, Catholics believe in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. Am I wrong, or?
Yeah, they do.
So, I think one could make the argument that where there are valid sacraments, the church, and I'm not saying that every mass that's said is legitimate. I'm just saying that there are, supposedly 80%, or I don't know what the statistics are now, it's like 70 or something, don't believe in the real presence. So,
right.
I'm imagining that includes priests. But I think if you have the requisite faith for the apostolic faith, and you're partaking in Holy Communion, then you are part of the universal church, which is the Catholic Church, which would include the Roman Catholic Church, and also likely the Eastern Orthodox Church as well.
Well, that's not even, I mean, in traditional Catholic theology, that's not even true. I mean, they would say that the Orthodox are schismatics and damnable for rejecting the papacy as well as the last 1,000 years of ecumenical councils. So the fact that the papacy has reversed that and now says that we're all brothers and we're part of the same church, that alone is enough to show that the Roman Catholic Church has changed its views.
Yeah, and I'm not denying there's not a ton of problems with, and I heard earlier you were saying that Vatican I and II were dogma that has to be accepted, but
right,
as far as I know, there's only 3 dogmas that were promulgated, which that was ex cathedra. So
absolutely not true. Absolutely not true. Right underneath this is a list of 4 statements from Denzinger that tell you that you have to follow all of the papal teaching, not just the universal ordinary magisterium, but also the ordinary teaching. And so the very thing that you just said is actually condemned in those four screenshots.
All right, I'll be completely honest. I'm not qualified to, respond, but I do think.
Well, it's just a myth. I mean, this is a popular myth that Roman Catholics have, that they only have to believe 2 or 3 or 5 things. That's totally not true.
Right, but my question then is, I'm not saying you're right or wrong. What I'm saying is, what do you think about those 3 dogmas that were promulgated? You think that they are?
I mean, I'm not trying to be mean to you, man, but like, you understand that every ecumenical council would be dogma. There's a book that's 700 pages called Denzinger that's the sources of Catholic dogma. So where did you get the idea that you only have to believe 3 ex cathedra dogmas?
No, I was talking specifically about Vatican I and II, about the Immaculate Conception, and honestly, I'm not, like I said,
Vatican I and II are not about the Immaculate Conception.
Well, there were, but do you know what I'm speaking of? When there was, I think, 2 or 3 dogmas that were ex cathedra.
No, those are just ex cathedra. No, those are just statements that were ex cathedra papal dogmas, but that's not all of the papal dogmas.
Oh no, of course not. I'm saying I'm curious what your position on those 3 were. What if they're if those are?
No, we're not gonna. We don't believe. We don't believe something because the Pope says it. Absolutely.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you think.
No, we don't believe in the Immaculate Conception. No.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I was curious. Then how do you deal with the problem of, Mary carrying? Because it's a fascinating topic, and I think it's they try to use their logic and their reasoning as much as they could.
Because it's not necessary in Orthodox anthropology. There's nothing that's transmitted in some metaphysical sense that is some taint What's transmitted is the deprivation of grace and the effects of sin, not any quote unquote sin. So there's no such thing as original sin itself that's transmitted to people. What's transmitted is a corruption and a lack of grace. So Mary can be preserved from any actual sins and still be the spotless virgin, and there's no necessity or need for some immaculate conception of her. The only reason you would even think that is if you have an erroneous Augustinian idea of what original sin is.
Okay, so yeah, I mean that I know that. So I mean, I know that the Eastern Fathers do not look. The Orthodox aren't fond of Augustine and his. So.
Well, we say he's a saint, but we don't follow everything he said, just like we don't follow everything that every single church father says.
So, okay, and I just want to make sure I understood you, because so you're saying the need for Immaculate Conception doesn't exist because there's the original sin doctrine and Ethan. I'm just trying to understand
Yes, correct. It's a different anthropology and a different idea about what original sin is, and so there's no need for Immaculate Conception in our theology. We also would say that Mary is a daughter of Adam, and every son and daughter of Adam experiences the consequences of the fall, which is death. And so when you, even in the Roman Catholic Church, have a doctrine of the dormition of the Virgin, you believe the same thing. You believe she, quote, went to sleep or passed away.
So could you explain the difference between the theological underpinnings between how Roman Catholics have more of an Aristotelian viewpoint versus, if I'm correct, the Orthodox have a more of a Platonic understanding? Is that right?
No, I would reject that. I would say that if you read people like St. John Damascus, you would find that he's very Aristotelian. If you read somebody like St. Maximus the Confessor, he pulls from both Plato and Aristotle. So it's just kind of an oversimplification. And I would argue that actually Orthodoxy is more against Platonism than Roman Catholicism is. In fact, Roman Catholicism is more Neoplatonic than Orthodoxy is. We have multiple places and statements where we explicitly reject. For example, in the Synodicon, you are a heretic if you believe in either Aristotelianism or Plato's ideas.
So what do you do about, so you're saying there's a synthesis, there's different, but there are different schools of thought. So like you're saying you can't pigeonhole Orthodox.
I don't think in Orthodoxy that there's not schools of thought. It's not like Roman Catholicism with Franciscans and Dominicans and Cistercians. No, it's not like that at all. There's pretty much the same idea as to what the mystical experience of every saint is. It's all a unified experience of the divine light. There's not mystical quests in the LARPing realm of the ether where you're going into interior castles and imagining yourself in Hades and being burned and tortured by demons like Alphonsus Liguori says. None of that. Rather, everybody has the exact same experience of purgation, illumination, and deification. That's the same for everybody. So it's very different in that regard, and it's not even, there's no like the Platonic school of Orthodoxy versus the Aristotelian school of Orthodoxy. In fact, wow, Saint Justinian and those after him, they shut down the Platonic academies in Byzantium.
Okay, interesting. And what? So I guess that begs. What do you think of Origen? Do you think he was a heretic, or do you think
absolutely
because of what, the pre-existence of souls, or what?
The whole system is heterodox. If you read the Sixth Ecumenical Council, there's a 4-page condemnation of Saint Sophronius that's accepted at the Sixth Council that condemns the entire system of Origen, including pre-existence of souls, his allegorizing of Genesis and Eden, eternal falls, eternal worlds, all of it.
Okay.
He was condemned in his own day too, by the way. People have this lie. They make up this story that he wasn't. He was condemned by St. Optatus in his own day.
Interesting. Yeah, and thanks for
good questions.
Am I done, or am I still going? Or are you still going?
Do you have something else you want to mention?
Yes. I was wondering, so your contention is that we're, Catholics are bound by basically heterodox teaching. Is that it? I'm trying to figure out your main contention.
I don't think heterodoxy. There's not schools of thought. It's not like Roman Catholicism with Franciscans and Dominicans and Cistercians. No, it's all a unified experience of the divine light. There's not mystical quests in the Well, it depends on which person has been on here, but yeah, I argued to the first two or three guys that popped on that explain to me how your position is true when the dogmas have changed, and they said, "Well, I don't accept Vatican II," and then I said, "Well, you have to accept that. You don't get that liberty to choose which councils you want in Roman Catholicism." The other guy said, "Well, the dogmas haven't changed, but I'm actually a pagan atheist." So I mean, we've heard all kinds of wild stuff today, so.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. No. It's
So I mean, I'll just say this: like, how do you worship the same God as the Muslims? I mean, that's what two Vatican II documents say.
No, I'm on deck with you. I think that there's a train wreck, or it happened, or it's happening, or
Okay. Do you think that you get to reject Vatican II?
I mean, I'm subject to God, so that I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
Okay. Well, what's the Roman Catholic position?
Yeah, but okay, really quick. I want to answer your question, but do you think that we might be talking about two different churches? Or
I mean, how many Roman Catholic churches are there that centered around the guy in Rome named Francis?
Right. No, I'm sorry for laughing. I remember last time you said it was cringe. I understand your point of view, but do you see where I'm going? I don't.
No, I don't. Not at all.
Okay. I do think so. There's a famous quote by Archbishop Sheen, and he says that millions of people hate what they misconceive to be the Roman Catholic Church versus what it really is. And
okay, so is it not what's in Lumen Gentium and Nostra Aetate? Is that not the Roman Catholic Church?
Honestly, I like reading things that are from like the first century, second, third, up to.
Okay, well, that's not Roman Catholicism because in the Roman Catholic position, the Roman Catholic Church is not what's in the first, second, and third century. It's what the papal magisterium has always and presently teaches.
Right, but in essence, okay. So can I ask you a question then?
Sure.
What would be? Was there a time when, let's say, the Roman Catholic Church or the Catholic, that branch, would they have been a valid church at some point?
Yeah, absolutely. We would say they were Orthodox Catholics like us for a long time, and then they began to depart when they started to introduce deviations into the creed. And then ultimately it culminates in 1054 and 1274.
Okay, so you don't. I can't remember I don't want to. I know you're more educated than me on this, but I know there's a scripture passage in John. I'm trying to recall a chapter and verse. I think might be chapter 14. I'm not sure, but he does say that the Spirit proceeds from the Son in Greek. I mean that's what it says in the Greek.
No, the text literally says from the Father.
Okay, I have to find a particular passage, but I sound stupid without knowing what it is.
Yeah, it does not say from the Father. I know the passage you're talking about.
Right, but isn't there's not a passage where it says that it also proceeds from the Son?
You're talking about John 14, and it says that who proceeds from the Father, he will testify about me, is what Jesus says.
Proceeds from the Father, but the Son sends him. Yeah, if the Son sends the one who proceeds, that is likewise. Okay. I have to look. I would have to circle back because I don't want to spend time reading while we're talking. Okay, so can you explain then what's problematic about saying that the Spirit proceeds from the Son?
I mean, we have really long talks about that.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry.
So,
okay.
I mean, it compromises the hypostatic property of the Father, which is to be the sole cause.
Right, but don't Roman Catholics believe in eternal generation, just like the Orthodox do?
Yeah, but that's not real. That's not what I said. It compromises what picks out the person of the Father. The person of the Father is the sole cause, according to the Cappadocians. SOLE, sole cause. So if that's what picks out the Father, it can't also be a property of the Son.
Okay, so it's a matter of that they have different roles, or is what you're saying?
Correct. It results in a dyad. You have a father son as a single principle of the spiration of the Spirit, according to Lyons and Florence. So now you've compromised the triad by making it a dyad.
Interesting. I see. And that, okay, that's because.
Anything that one person has must be unique to that person to pick them out as a hypostatic property, and any other kind of trait or property must be had by all three, and thus would be a property of nature. So there's no power that two persons have that the other person lacks. So if causing a person is now a new power of divinity, you've subordinated the Holy Spirit because he does not possess the power of causing a divinity of causing a person.
Right. Okay. I'm gonna have to go back and listen to this to digest that. That's an interesting argument.
There's also arguments that it compromises divine simplicity, because if the Father generates the Son whole and entire and perfect, and then he must necessarily also spirate the Spirit whole and entire and perfect, and so there's nothing that the Son could contribute to the procession of the Spirit that the Father didn't do. There's no parts in this. Did the Father do 50% of the Holy Spirit and the Son did 50%? That doesn't make any sense.
Right. You're saying it can't proceed from two different sources. It would have to be the same source.
Well, what would the Son be doing in this that the Father isn't doing? Now, we agree that the Son, the Holy Spirit proceeds through the Son, but that doesn't make the Son a source of the existential movement of the Spirit. He does not derive his existence from the Son.
Right. That makes sense. I can't speak intelligently on this because you're more well read than I. So, but for the sake of argument, my understanding was that the division wasn't really over that doctrine. It was really a political power struggle that was happening.
Well, it was all the above. So it was partly that, and it was geopolitical power, and it was other things.
Right. Okay. Yeah. No, I'd like to examine it further.
There's a good book called Filioque by Edward Szyszynski. I would recommend that. We did a whole 3-hour summary of that book. You would also do well to just read some of the Cappadocians, because they don't teach the Filioque. But
do you
appreciate that? And if you read the Cappadocians, you will notice that it's their theology that's accepted at Constantinople I. It's not the Augustinian doctrine of the Trinity. Daniel.
Yep.
Hey.
So, I wanted to talk about some ecclesiology. So I understand we both so I'm a Catholic. We both share 7 ecumenical councils, right? And then we split, and then we did a bunch more. And then, would you say that the Orthodox have had ecumenical councils after the 7, or?
Yeah, well, after the oikumene goes away, we didn't. It makes no sense to really talk about them being ecumenical. So we have pan-Orthodox synods that continue after that. So there's the 8th ecumenical council, and then there's the Palamite synods, which would count as the 9th.
Okay, so what do you mean by the oikumene going away?
That's the term for the empire. The imperium is what the ecumenical councils means, empire-wide. That's why they were called by all the ecumenical councils are called by the emperors.
Oh, well, don't people believe that the Russian Tsar functioned like in the same vein as the Byzantine emperors?
Yeah, but the Russian New Rome idea is not the equivalent to the Byzantine Empire. So the idea is that the tradition continues, and the idea of the church-state relations would continue, but it doesn't translate into the same structure that existed in the first 1,000 years.
So could there be like another oikumene in the future?
Sure, it's possible.
So, but why wouldn't they just do that with the Russian one if that's integral to the structure of the church?
No, I'm not saying that the state is integral to the church. It's just what happens. So no, that the church doesn't require or subsist within any necessary state. I mean, the church didn't have Byzantium or the state for the first 300 years. It did fine.
Yeah. Until after Rome was after Constantine.
Right.
But So there's the Palamite synods, and those you would say are
yeah, we call those pan-Orthodox
binding.
synods. When something is received throughout the entire Orthodox world, they pretty much attain that status. So we would call them authoritative or pan-Orthodox.
Okay. So you kind of need the, and then I've seen things that were saying that like even like Orthodox agree that in the first 1,000 years you needed the Pope to
No, I've never heard of that.
To confirm.
Well, the expectation was that all the patriarchates would confirm councils and decrees. Yes, but it's not like he was essentially necessary to know what theology was. I mean, just think about how would you? Let's apply this argument to like 310 AD. Like, did people in 310 before the Council of Nicaea if they didn't live in Rome, could they know what the faith was?
I see.
Yeah, so the Roman bishop's not necessary to epistemically have certitude or knowledge of the faith. By the way, Benedict has admitted that the Orthodox Church has maintained, quote unquote, the Catholic faith for the last 1,000 years without the papacy. So there's Benedict admitting that we don't need the papacy to maintain the faith.
And then Constantinople I and Constance, both kind of.
I think so. I think those are good arguments. Yeah.
What's a good book you would recommend on just like Orthodox ecclesiology?
There probably is one specific book out there just on that. I'm not aware of a book just on that because usually Orthodox dogmatics and theology we don't have like text that specify or just written on that one topic. There probably is one, but usually any Orthodox theological treatise or systematic theology will cover it somewhere. I would say something like Meyendorff, the Orthodox Church, or we have specific apologetic books written, like Michael Welton's book, Two Paths is probably a good book on that.
Yeah, I just got that. So
I think the new Papadakis Meyendorff book on the period of the 1000 to 1400 is really good.
So it's just called, what is that one called? The Orthodox Church?
It's called the Christian East and the Rise of the Papacy.
Okay, bet. Thank you, Jay.
Yeah, sure. Good questions. Catholic something. Monarch, I can't read the rest of it. Oh, wait, Daniel, I'm sorry. Daniel was next. Catholic, hold on a second. Daniel Hartness was next. Go ahead, Daniel.
Hey, Jay, good to talk to you again, ma'am.
Yes, sir.
So, obviously not Catholic, but I was talking to a partialist this week. And
what is that?
A partialist?
Yeah, I don't know what that is. What is that?
Somebody who believes that the that the Trinity is represented in parts, like Christ is a part of God, or that the three persons are parts. They're not fully God. They're not truly God, completely God. And
I've never heard of this position. Like, what? Is this like a recognized group? I've never heard of anybody saying this ever.
So you've not heard of...
I'm not knocking you. It's just
no, you're fine. So you've not heard of partialism?
Never.
Okay.
Pretty much everybody I've ever heard, even like Arians, like everybody believes in divine simplicity. So how could God be composed of parts and yet be simple, unchangeable, etc.?
Well, this will be fun for you then. So have you seen just quick divergence? Have you seen the what is it? It's like those two Irish. It's a cartoon, and it's those two Irish guys dealing with heretical analogies of the Trinity on YouTube, and they say that's Arianism, Patrick. That's modalism, Patrick. Have you seen that video?
I have not.
Okay. Well, I feel like I'm telling you like an entire fictional tale then. Okay. But,
I believe you. I don't think you're making it up. It's just I've never heard of this position, but.
Okay. So yeah, partialism, basically, it's an argument from what I can tell, mainly against the hypostatic union, right? Because it attacks a lot of things. And that's where my question comes to you. So my argument against him he was doing a bit of word concept fallacy with the word fully, where if Christ takes on a human nature, right, or a human form as he called it, and he clearly lays down his deity, right, and I know this is problematic, lays down his deity, he's powerless because he says, I cannot do anything except through my Father. He says that shows an incoherence in the hypostatic union, because the hypostatic union uses the word fully. And I said, well, it's not about the term itself. You can say completely God, truly God. It's the concept that matters more than the word used to describe it.
Correct.
But it's just hard to not get too semantical with the person. So,
God can't cease to be God. So when it says that he limited himself, the kenosis passage, it's not saying that he ceased to have the divine nature. It means that he chose not to exercise all the divine powers that he possesses.
Well, that's exactly what I said, because God doesn't always have to be doing the same action all the time, right? Like Christ isn't always creating, right? He can, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Correct.
But what is the term for, I guess I'm just looking for like the best way to just break it down and show him that if God is partial, or like each hypostasis.
Well, look, I would say I would just go into what we think the divine nature is. If something possesses the divine nature, that means that it's not composed of parts. It's not changeable. It's impassible. It's not located at a specific place and time. And it's not like the created order. So all of those things that we would say about divinity and divine nature would be negated if there were parts, if it was composed, if it could change, if it could cease to be. It just immediately involves us in a contradiction. It basically would say it's making God into a creature, and that's idolatry, or that's paganism.
Okay, and that kind of breaks down the principle of immutability, right? And
correct, yeah. So when I say impassible, it's the same idea. He's unchangeable.
And I would say, I would go further in this partialistic worldview. It makes the deity of God, or the essence, almost imperfect, right? Because
absolutely, yeah, you can go that route too. Yeah. John Damascus describes the divinity as perfect. Correct.
Okay, I was talking to him through the Athanasian Creed, which I think that's the first instance of really fleshing out this idea of Christ is completely God and completely human, the hypostatic union that I could find. And
we're not usually promoters of the Athanasian Creed because it's a forgery. I mean, it can be read in a correct way, but we don't really promote it. I mean, the Council of Ephesus teaches, and Chalcedon teaches the two natures of Christ.
So it'd be better to point to like Saint Cyril discussing, like debating against Nestorius then.
Yeah, or just the way that John Damascus describes divinity on the Orthodox faith.
Okay, that helps, Jay.
But I mean, I doubt that guy's going to care what any of the church fathers say, because it sounds like he's kind of making up his own thing.
Well, the appeal is always one of arrogance. So the example is when they say, I'm just telling you what the Bible says, or I don't care what any quote unquote father says if it's against the Bible. It's like you get into this never ending loop of
the Bible,
my interpretation's perfect,
Yeah, like you said, the Bible has to be interpreted. So the question isn't, can you cite the church fathers and the Bible? It's, are you interpreting it correctly? So
right. Well, and one question against Orthodoxy and Catholicism, Jay, or their difference, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So in Catholicism, this is just my Protestant understanding, there is that ultimate interpretation, right, that they must adhere to, right? This comfortability that a laity can have in the catechism, right? If they wonder about something, they can just cling to it. There's the answer.
Correct. That's a typical Roman Catholic talking point, yeah.
Okay, so I get that, and I get why a Protestant would almost like that, right? Like, I just have to think less almost, and I'm not trying to straw man.
Correct.
In Orthodoxy, if you have a patriarch, for example, who has like an ecumenical perspective, like a pretty modern ecumenical perspective, and then more of like what I've heard called the true Orthodox perspective of non-ecumenical, right? Like Protestants or heterodox, etc. What do you do about that? What's the next step if they disagree?
I'm sorry, can you restate that? What exactly is the question?
Okay. If two,
I got distracted. Somebody was messaging me. I apologize.
No, you're fine, man. So if there are two Orthodox patriarchs and they disagree with one another, perhaps on the state of ecumenism, what do you do about it? What's the step of resolving that disagreement, or is there a step?
I mean, there's no one size fits all silver bullet for any position. And so if you're in the Roman Catholic world, you have the exact same problem, and Francis doesn't solve it, nor do the last 70 years of the Pope solve it. So there's two different things going in. One is the question of existential individual certitude, which we would all agree, whether you're Protestant, Catholic, or Orthodox, in the final analysis, the only thing that gives the individual certitude is the Holy Spirit. So, but where we differ is the means to get to that. So I would say that for the Orthodox, it's a much more holistic approach as to how we derive our ethos and our doctrine. It would be the liturgy, it would be the lives of the saints, it would be the teachings of the church fathers, the councils, the Bible, all of that. There's no like tier of, oh, here's the 3 things that are necessary, here's the non-necessary 25 things, it just doesn't work like that in Orthodoxy, because we don't even think that's plausible. It's not even a real thing that can exist. So and by the way, there have been multiple cases in church history when there was patriarchs out of communion with each other.
Right, I'm familiar.
So this still always exists, and so the answer is ultimately that no, there's not going to be any silver bullet answer as to whether you would just you have to figure out the one that's correct and the one that's not correct.
And if you have a differing opinion, like let's say you as a laity believed in death before the fall, right? And that was just your belief, and obviously your spiritual father does not. Are you allowed to argue that? Can you, if you have something like that, what do you do about that? And it's clearly not what your spiritual father of your church believes, or the Orthodox position.
Well, I think if it's your immediate authority that's above you, you're supposed to have at least an attitude of humility and being willing to be corrected. But that doesn't necessarily mean that your spiritual father or the people above you are always necessarily going to be correct. So I think you just have to navigate that with, balance and with humility, and not going into any excess in either direction.
Okay. And last question, Jay. What are the best verses in the Bible to study the hypostatic union and then read the fathers from that perspective besides Philippians? Any specific verses in John? I can't think of a specific one. Maybe John 1, obviously.
Well, all of John 1 deals with Christ being in the flesh, but also still in the bosom of the Father. I mean, those are relevant passages.
Well, what about the fact that he has two natures, the human or the two wills? Like
a body thou hast prepared for me.
Say that again.
A body thou hast prepared for me.
As in having a will, not just...
No, but I'm saying that that's a passage about the diophysite nature of Christ.
Okay. And with a nature always comes a will. So it's got a philosophical consistency where you get this...
Well, the prayer in Gethsemane, not my will, but thy will be done. Let this cup pass from me. That's actually the entire debate of the Sixth Council. What would become the Sixth Council, the debate between Maximus and Pyrrhus, ends up being just a debate over that passage. Okay,
and that's where Christ's will, the divine will, that's not broken up across 3 persons. There's one divine will. It's his human will that is. Okay. Would you say it's his human will contradicting the divine will, or what's the correct term for the action?
No, he has a natural desire to not want to die, which all humans have, which we would say is a blameless passion. But he submits to that blameless passion. He submits to the will of the Father and decides to undergo that death.
Just like a martyr, a Christian martyr would do, for example, like Stephen. Okay. And in the Athanasian Creed, and this might be the problem with it, the Creed analogizes the hypostatic union to how man is also soul and flesh,
That's from Cyril. Cyril does that.
Okay. Does that mean and I'm thinking of St. Paul when he talks about, I do the things I don't want to do. Is he contrasting a spiritual will that we have versus our fleshly will, and therefore two natures in a man?
No, Cyril is talking about just the comparison between the relationship of body and soul together, making up a composite whole. And he's saying that Christ's two natures are like that. It's a composite whole.
And man, regardless of our tripartite state of being, we still yet have one nature, one hypostasis.
Correct. Person, though, is distinct from nature in humans and in God. So there's a
right,
distinction
essence
between
versus hypostasis.
Correct. But the passions is what you're referring to. When Paul is talking about the struggles of the flesh, that's the unruly desires that we have as a result of the fall. So we don't believe that Christ had those passions. Those are called blameful passions, which we have as fallen human beings. But Christ was born of a virgin so that he would not be subject to the blameful passions. We believe that he willfully took on the blameless passions, such as hunger, thirst, not wanting to die, etc.
Right. Okay. Well, Jay, as always, man, I really appreciate it. I hope you have a good day.
Thank you. Yeah, a couple books you would want to read on that if you want to go deeper into that specific issue is the Little Blue Cosmic Mystery of Christ. There's a whole chapter on the blameful, blameless passions of St. Maximus there. And then Maximus's dispute with Pyrrhus, the monothelite. It all ends up being a debate on this specific topic. It's a little book. It's about 80, 100 pages. It's not a very long read, but the whole debate is about two wills and two energies in Christ, which proves two natures. If energy is the manifestation of nature, then Christ possessing an energy proper to humanity and an energy proper to divinity shows two natures, is part of the argument. But he argues that in the Gethsemane passage that Christ is submitting the human will to the divine will. So it's open for him if anybody wants to hop on. I know there was a Roman Catholic guy that hopped on and then left. The issue is Roman Catholicism versus papacy. Roman Catholicism versus, I guess nowadays it is Roman Catholicism versus papacy, but Roman Catholicism versus Orthodoxy. And Protestantism is also relevant here. You can pop in if you're a Protestant. We've had many Protestants already hop on and give their 2 cents, give their arguments, their take. But specifically today, it's about the papacy. Whether you think that this is something that can be defended, you're a Roman Catholic, you want to make your arguments for why the papacy is true, why Orthodoxy is not true, you're welcome to hop on. We've had many already. It looks like there's not many here. I mean, I know out of 160 people, there's got to be some Roman Catholics that want to make an argument. I mean, we had 2 of them that hopped on and then left, so I don't know where they went. And Chilla, do you want to come back on? Where's that other guy? Monarchist or whatever his name was. Where'd you go? And for those that are interested, underneath this space, I did link a specific section in Lumen Gentium that talks about the Muslims. Very similar terminology is used in Nostra Aetate as well. So it's not like, oh, well, I don't have to listen to Nostra Aetate. Well, do you have to listen to Lumen Gentium? I mean, they want to come up with these sort of arbitrary classifications of all these Vatican II documents. Well, this one's binding, this one's not, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, it's in both documents. It's also in the Catechism, too. So anybody who wants to discuss it. But by the way, Nostra Aetate extends it beyond Muslims also to Hindus. So it's not just Muslims, it's also Hindus. We all worship the same, quote, God, which I don't know how anybody could come to that conclusion. But I'll add the Nostra Aetate quote as well. It says, in Hinduism, men contemplate the divine mystery and they express it through an inexhaustible abundance of myths, through searching philosophical inquiry. They seek freedom from anguish of our human condition and enter into ascetical practices and profound meditation or a flight to God, capital G, the true God, with love and faith. So, not sure how anybody, if you knew, if you are familiar with Christianity, Christian theology, how you could come to the conclusion that Hinduism is a path to the same God and that God accepts the worship of Hinduism and so forth. It's just insane to me. And yet this is what it says. And all week long, Roman Catholics have been fussing and sassing as if we all have the same theology and that we're all in the same church ultimately. Oh, and by the way, they scored Russell Brand and Candace Owens, and they're doing victory laps. Meanwhile, their church is collapsing in terms of attendance, in terms of vocations, in terms of 40 parishes in Baltimore shutting down. Oh, it has nothing to do with a priestly abuse. It's because the boomers want to go to the suburbs. This is their cope. Boomers are going to no. It's not the 600 cases of abuse, 150 abusive priests in the last several decades. It's boomers want to go to the suburbs. Give me a break. What kind of cope is that? That's ridiculous. Now, the root of the problem is what you're reading right there. Muslims, Hindus, and Christians all worship the same God. That's the root of the problem. This is idolatry. It's heresy. It's not true. If this was true, then why were there martyrs? Why die a martyr's death? Bro, we're all worshiping the same God. Why call crusades against the Muslims? Did they not know what Francis and Pope Benedict knew? That you can go and pray in the mosques towards Mecca with the Muslims? All these crusades, all these wars against the Saracens, the godless infidels, they're called the ecumenical councils. Didn't you realize that you just had to be friends and pray with them? Why can people not see through this fraud? It's like clear as day. Well, the answer is that they're not actually instructed in Christianity. Because anybody instructed in Christianity would know you can't go and pray in mosques with antichrist Muslims. And by the way, they go and pray in the synagogues as well. Do you understand that the ancient canons forbid clerics to pray in the synagogues and in mosques? How are you the church of the first 1,000 years when you don't follow the basic canons about not worshiping in synagogues and mosques? I mean, this is like, it's a no-brainer. Well, that's just his private error, his private opinion. It's not a private error and private opinion. It's a public action, public worship that Reuters and a million websites and a million news agencies have published everywhere across the globe. What do you mean it's a private action? It's ridiculous, made up. All right, well, hopefully I don't see any more Catholics. If you want to, this is your last chance. If you want to come on, make an argument, make your case, you're welcome to. Otherwise, I want to remind you guys to head on over to my website, to my channel, Jay's Analysis, Jay Dyer on YouTube. And remember, tonight, for those on the correct calendar, it is Holy Saturday. So hopefully everybody gets to church tonight. We'll be at church all night tonight. It's going to be, we're all about some church tonight. And all about that church. Didn't Snoop Dogg have a song about church? Well, that's what it's going to be tonight. I don't see any more Roman Catholics, so I guess we will call it an evening.